In the deep of a summer night in August of 1 BC, the 25-year-old emperor of the Han Dynasty suddenly fell ill and died. Deep within the Weiyang Palace, the night pressed down upon the rooftops. Along the long passageways, torches flickered in the morning breeze, and the Imperial guards stood beneath the gates, their armor gleaming coldly in the dim light. No one dared speak loudly. Within the hall, only muffled sobs could be heard, drifting through the curtains like wind trapped in a throat. A handsome 22-year-old man stood in the palace, utterly lost. His court attire was splendid, but his face was pale. He was the emperor's male favorite, the one closest to him, the one he trusted most. Everyone was watching him. The guards outside the hall also waited for him to speak. For at this moment, his titles were Grand Marshal, General of the Guards, and Head of the Imperial Secretariat. In other words, he was supposed to be the very center of imperial power at this critical hour. But he gave no orders. With the emperor's death, he suddenly realized that all his power came from the man lying behind the curtains. The Son of Heaven's favor was his only path to the highest reaches of the empire. Now that path was broken. He was Grand Marshal, first among all officials, yet he had almost no confidants of his own. He was General of the Guards, in charge of the palace security, yet he could not be sure of commanding the Imperial Guard. He held administrative authority, yet he did not know whether he should first suppress news of the death, summon the High Ministers, or go to request the Grand Empress Dowager. More importantly, everyone knew and had foreseen his helplessness. The air in the Weiyang Palace began to change. Those who had bowed to him in ordinary times now had hesitation in their eyes. Hesitation gave way to scrutiny. Scrutiny gave way to waiting. Everyone was waiting to see whether this young man, elevated above all officials by the emperor's own hand, could actually hold the court together after the dead emperor. He could not. News passed through the many palace gates and raced toward the Changxin Palace north of Chang'an. The Changxin Palace was home to Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhengjun. Wang Zhengjun was not the biological grandmother of Emperor Ai. Emperor Ai had come from a collateral branch, adopted into the imperial line to inherit the throne. But the Han Empire did not operate solely on blood. It operated on status. Wang Zhengjun had been the empress of Emperor Yuan and the mother of Emperor Qing. That is to say, she was not the young emperor's biological grandmother, but she was the woman of the highest seniority in the empire's legal and ritual order. Whether by that ritual order or by the lessons of past Han experience, at this moment the final authority could only be this woman. So the 70-year-old woman did not hesitate for a moment. She immediately set out from the Changxin Palace with her trusted attendants and the Imperial Guard. This was not a condolence visit. It was a silent, bloodless coup. The Grand Empress Dowager's carriage sped along the palace roads. The eunuch leading the way held a torch, and her attendants followed with hushed steps. One by one, the palace gates swung open. The guards knelt prostrate. No one dared ask where she was going. She had not come to request entry. She had come to take over the Weiyang Palace. When Wang Zhengjun entered the hall, the young Grand Marshal was still there. She gave him no chance to explain. She first looked at the emperor's body, then at the others in the hall, and finally her gaze settled on that dazed young man. There was no shouting, no argument. Then she demanded the imperial seal and tassel. No one dared obstruct or object. The heirloom seal of the realm, which had been held by the emperor since the time of the first emperor of Qin, was respectfully brought to Wang Zhenjun's side. Immediately afterward, Wang Zhenjun ordered the Dong Xian the interrogated on how he proposed to arrange the emperor's funeral. Dong Xian had no plan and could not answer. Wang Zhenjun said coldly, "Then let someone who has handled state funerals do it." Thereupon, Wang Zhenjun summoned her nephew, the former Grand Marshal Wang Mang, to enter the palace at once. Under Wang Zhenjun's direction, one edict after another was issued in the name of the Grand Empress Dowager. Matters of the Imperial Secretariat were put under Wang Mang's management. The dispatch of troops and use of tallies were placed under Wang Mang's control. The memorials of all officials were to be decided by Wang Mang. The Yellow Gate eunuchs and the gate guards were to follow Wang Mang's orders. The Weiyang Palace, indeed the entire empire, had in fact completed a transfer of power. Almost immediately, the Grand Minister over the masses, Huo Guang, impeached Dong Xian. Without debate or trial, Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhenjun swiftly approved the impeachment. That night, imperial envoys led the Yulin Guard to confiscate Dong Xian's seal as Grand Marshal. Seeing that his cause was lost, Dong Xian committed suicide. Then Huo Guang submitted further memorials. The Dong family was ransacked, and all its members were exiled. One day earlier, Dong Xian had been the brightest star in the political sky of the Han Empire. Then he vanished, more fleeting than a shooting star. At that moment, the politics of the Han Empire seemed finally to have stabilized. Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhenjun, who had lived through more than 50 years of court struggles across 4 reigns, presided over the inner palace. The powerful consort kin Wang Mang led the inner court. The outer court, led by Grand Minister over the masses Huo Guang, appeared to have fallen into step. In times past, this was a pattern with which Han officials were deeply familiar. Yet attentive observers would notice a detail rich with irony. This Grand Minister over the masses, Huo Guang, who had been so instrumental in the power seizure, was a 14th-generation descendant of Confucius. And only a little over a month earlier, Huo Guang's title of Grand Minister over the masses had still been Chancellor. Yes, the Chancellor who should have been second only to the Emperor, who should have been responsible for the entire administrative affairs of the empire, who should have used the power of his office to balance and constrain the imperial will. Where had that kind of Chancellor gone? How had he degenerated into a puppet and an assistant? More importantly, where had imperial power gone? Into whose hands had it fallen? Today, we will recount the evolution of court politics over the 210 years of the Western Han Dynasty. We will tell the joys and sorrows of the men and women involved. And above all, we will examine how these dramatic conflicts profoundly shaped the distribution of power and the political structure of China for thousands of years to come, down to the present day. This will be the truest Game of Thrones, and far more fascinating. Everything has a beginning. The source of all this chaotic power can be traced back over 100 years to the era of Emperor Wu of Han. Many people think of Emperor Wu as one of the most powerful sovereigns in Chinese history. He struck north against the Xiongnu, subdued the Baiyue in the south, reformed the realm, and pushed imperial power to unprecedented heights. But when he first ascended the throne, what truly weighed upon him was not the Xiongnu, nor the feudal kings, but his grandmother, Grand Empress Dowager Dou. Grand Empress Dowager Dou was the empress of Emperor Wen, the mother of Emperor Qing, and the grandmother of Emperor Wu. While she lived, the Dou clan dominated the court and wielded enormous influence. More importantly, she represented the old, conservative, Huang Lao-favoring, reform-averse political tradition that had persisted since the reigns of Emperors Wen and Qing. For the young Emperor Wu, who wished to implement new policies, promote Confucian scholars, and break free from the constraints of old officials and old nobility, his first obstacle was his grandmother in the deep palace and the Consort Qin faction behind her. Then another woman stepped onto the stage. She was Empress Wang, the mother of Emperor Wu. A descendant of old nobility from the state of Xian, Empress Wang possessed something that no chancellor or general had. She was the emperor's mother. She stood closest to the emperor and understood better than anyone what the young emperor truly needed. A newly enthroned emperor, seeking to oppose his grandmother's power, could not rely on his will alone. He needed men who truly belonged to him. So Empress Wang's family was pushed to the forefront. Her half-brother was rapidly promoted by Emperor Wu and eventually made chancellor. This was not merely a matter of an uncle's promotion. It signified a new political logic taking shape. The emperor began using his own mother's clan to oppose the family faction left by another woman of the inner palace. That is to say, the struggle for supreme power in the empire was no longer confined to the chancellor's residence and the court assembly. It had become deeply embedded in the inner palace, the mother's clan, maternal uncles, marriage, and blood ties. From this moment, a dangerous and highly effective model began to emerge in Western Han politics. If the emperor wanted to bypass the outer court, he would employ those close to him. And those closest to the emperor were seldom the chancellor, but rather his mother, empress, favored consort, and the families behind them. This was the beginning of the internalization of Han court politics. But an uncle, after all, still administered state affairs as chancellor. The chancellor could not always be the emperor's relative or someone of his own household. So Emperor Wu, weary of chancellor power, created a title that would later change the destiny of the Western Han: Grand Marshal. In 119 BC, the war between the Han Empire and the Xiongnu reached its fiercest stage. Wei Qing and Huo Qubing each led large forces deep into the desert, launching the Battle of Mobei. This was one of the most important military campaigns of Emperor Wu's reign, and a symbol of how highly militarized the Western Han state had become. And it was also in this year that Emperor Wu first established the post of Grand Marshal. More precisely, Wei Qing was appointed Grand Marshal and General-in-Chief, and Huo Qubing was appointed Grand Marshal and General of Agile Cavalry. At this time, the Grand Marshal was not yet the full-fledged chancellery-level office of later times. It was more like a crown placed upon the highest generals, the supreme military honor personally bestowed by the emperor. Yet the very appearance of this title carried significance beyond the military. Who were these two men? Wei Qing was the younger brother of the empress, the emperor's brother-in-law, and the uncle of the crown prince. Qubing was the empress's nephew and also the emperor's nephew. In other words, within them converged the inner palace, consort kin, crown prince, military merit, and supreme military authority. This was an extraordinarily powerful combination. Wei Zifu became empress in the inner palace. Wei Qing commanded the grand army in the outer court. Qubing performed unparalleled feats on the battlefield. The Wei clan did not occupy high positions by blood alone. They were genuinely capable and indeed helped Emperor Wu complete the strategic counteroffensive against the Xiongnu. Precisely because of this, their status as consort kin did not diminish them. Instead, it made them the emperor's most trusted agents, most able to break through old institutions. In the traditional system, the chancellor was first among officials, the minister of war held military authority, and the imperial councillor was the vice-chancellor. But by Emperor Wu's time, the scale of war was too great, the emperor's ambition too strong, and the old institutions no longer sufficed. Emperor Wu needed someone not constrained by the chancellor system, directly accountable to him, and able to command the highest military power. Thus, the Grand Marshal emerged. Ostensibly created for war, it actually opened a door. The emperor could entrust the highest military authority of the state to someone outside the traditional chancellor system. And that someone was invariably the emperor's most intimate consort kin. This was the crux of the matter. During Emperor Wu's lifetime, this mechanism served the strong imperial will. The emperor used consort kin to suppress old officials, the inner court to suppress the outer court, and the Grand Marshal and General-in-Chief to suppress the traditional chancellor system. As long as the emperor himself was strong enough, everyone else was merely his tool. But after the emperor died, the answer came at the end of Emperor Wu's life. In his later years, the curse of the witchcraft scandal erupted. The crown prince, Liu Ju, was driven to suicide. Empress Wei committed suicide. The Wei clan was dealt a devastating blow. The empire's succession system was almost entirely blooded. In the end, the young Liu Fuling was made crown prince, later to become Emperor Zhao. A child was about to inherit the empire, and the aged Emperor Wu had to arrange for someone who could hold the court together for this child. He chose Huo Guang. Huo Guang was neither chancellor nor imperial clansman. He came from the Wei Hua consort kin network, was Qubing's half-brother, and had grown up step by step as a close attendant to Emperor Wu. On his deathbed, Emperor Wu entrusted Huo Guang with the regency. Huo Guang, as Grand Marshal and General-in-Chief, took charge of the government as the young emperor's closest aide. This step was enormously significant. It set a template. From then on, a clear path emerged in Western Han politics. When the emperor was young, weak, newly enthroned, or when imperial power faced a vacuum, the person who could truly step forward to take control was the close associate of the emperor, the one holding the title of Grand Marshal and General-in-Chief. Huo Guang controlled the palace, the imperial secretariat, the young emperor, and appointments. The court still had a chancellor, officials still conducted daily business, but the man who truly decided the empire's fate was not in the chancellor's residence. He was in the mansion of the Grand Marshal and General-in-Chief. Yet Huo Guang still lacked one thing. Although he came from the Wei Huo clique, half-brother of Huo Qubing, he himself had no natural consort-kin relationship with Emperor Zhao. A man who wielded real power in the empire, if he could not connect himself to the emperor's inner palace and future offspring, would always have his power suspended in mid-air. So Huo Guang sent his granddaughter, Lady Shangguan, into the inner palace of Emperor Zhao. This girl was very young, only 6 years old, but she was soon established as empress. From then on, Huo Guang was no longer merely the Grand Marshal and General-in-Chief left by the late emperor. He was also the maternal grandfather of the reigning empress. This was a careful reshaping of identity. Huo Guang had only been a peripheral relative of the previous emperor's consort kin, without any necessary blood tie. By forcibly arranging the empress, he made himself into a consort relative. Thus, military power, regency authority, and inner palace status were all bound together in one family. When Emperor Zhao died 13 years later at only 20 years old, Huo Guang demonstrated the full extent of his power. He first installed Liu He, Prince of Changyi, then deposed him after only 27 days, and subsequently appointed Liu Xun, who had been living among the people, as the new emperor, later known as Emperor Xuan. That a subject could depose or enthrone an emperor was no longer just a matter of powerful ministers. It was the result of the Grand Marshal and General-in-Chief system developed to its extreme. It was under such circumstances that Emperor Xuan ascended the throne. He was different from the previous emperors. He had not been raised as a crown prince in the depths of the palace, surrounded by a retinue. His childhood began with a political disaster. In the curse of the witchcraft, the entire line of his great-grandfather, Crown Prince Liu Ju, was nearly uprooted. Liu Xun was thrown into prison as an infant, and though he survived, he spent a long time living among the common people. By the time Huo Guang brought him from the people to the throne, he had already seen the streets of Chang'an, ordinary citizens, and the faces of officials. This experience made him more knowledgeable about the world than many emperors, and more aware of danger. But it also left him with a fatal weakness. He had no court of his own. No old officials from the Eastern Palace, no entourage from childhood, no naturally formed imperial clan group around him. He was the emperor, but he seemed like an orphan suddenly placed on the throne. After Huo Guang's death, Emperor Xuan began slowly to take back power. But the problem was that he could not rely solely on himself. He needed his own people. And his own people often came first from the consort kin. Consort kin were about blood and marriage, the rope that an isolated emperor could most easily grasp. This was why the Shu and She families entered the scene. The Shu family came from Emperor Xuan's first wife. She was not a noble lady, but the wife of his impoverished days, when Xuan was lowly and in danger. She had accompanied Liu Xun through his most perilous and humble years. When Liu Xun ascended the throne, she was not just the empress, she was the living proof of Xuan's past. The Shu family thus entered the political center, both as the emperor's repayment for old affection and as his natural choice for building a foundation in his isolation. The She family was more unusual. They were the family of Emperor Xuan's paternal grandmother. Emperor Xuan's promotion of the Shu and She families was not mere favoritism. It was a practical political necessity. He was too isolated. an emperor who had emerged from prison and the streets, facing a powerful ministerial family like the Huo clan, facing a court long accustomed to being ruled by a Grand Marshal. If he did not promote the Shu and Shi families, he would have no family support of his own. If he did not build his own network of trusted people, he would forever live in Huo's shadow. And in this power chain, there was another family, the Zhang family. The Zhang family were not consort kin, though early on they had wanted to marry a daughter to Liu Xun when he was still wandering among the people, but nothing came of it. Nonetheless, the relationship between the Zhang family and Emperor Xuan far exceeded that of ordinary ruler and subject. From the time Xuan was young, the Zhang family had protected, cared for, and educated him. They were not his mother's clan or his wife's clan, but they were the people who truly looked after him when he had no one else. Such gratitude could sometimes be heavier than blood. Thus, throughout the reign of Emperor Xuan and into the reign of his son, from Huo Guang onward, there were a total of 5 Grand Marshals. Apart from one descendant of a founding official of the early Han, one came from the Zhang family, and the rest came from the Shi and Shu families. That is to say, in the late Western Han, except for very rare cases, the position of Grand Marshal became increasingly inseparable from the emperor's personal web of relationships. On the surface, it was an official post, but behind it often stood the person closest to the emperor, most trusted by him, most able to enter the deep recesses of the palace. This institutional abyss created by Emperor Wu was further deepened by Emperor Xuan. Such was the complexity of Emperor Xuan's politics. He was a wise ruler at the peak of the Western Han, capable of enduring for years, finally striking back at the Huo clan and reasserting imperial power. Yet to accomplish this, he still had to use the tools of internalization, consort kin empowerment, and Grand Marshal authority. He defeated the consort kin family left by Emperor Wu, but he inherited the consort kin system left by Emperor Wu. Next came another Empress Wang. She was unlike those consort relatives before her, who had powerful families, illustrious fathers and brothers, and a host of political allies already waiting at court. On the contrary, she had almost nothing. She was of common birth. Her father held no high office, no military merit, no truly heritable title. It was said that this man, in the mausoleum town north of Chang'an, was best at cockfighting, and it was on that basis that he became acquainted with the young Emperor Xuan when he was still wandering among the people. In other words, this was not a family to inspire awe among court officials, nor one with the qualifications to reach into the imperial center. But precisely because of this, Emperor Xuan ultimately chose her. After the Huo clan was exterminated, the position of empress became vacant. By ordinary logic, the new empress should have been chosen from among those consorts who were favored, had given birth to a son, or had family background. Some could please the emperor, some had borne him children, some had more respectable fathers and brothers. But Emperor Xuan did not do that. He chose a woman who was not particularly favored and had not borne any children. She became the later Empress Wang of Qing. This was not a romantic choice. What Emperor Xuan truly needed was perhaps not a wife at all, or at least not a wife who would recreate a consort kin crisis. The Huo family had just fallen, their shadows still pressed against the palace walls. Emperor Xuan knew better than anyone what a dangerous monster a family behind an empress could become once linked to the crown prince, the palace, the imperial secretariat, and the imperial guard. He still needed consort kin, of course, but he already had the Shu, Shi, and Zhang families. Perhaps he had come to understand clearly that once consort kin got out of control, they would devour imperial power in return. So he did not want to seek out another powerful empress's family. What he wanted was simply a foster mother for the only son left by his first wife, the commoner empress, the crown prince. That foster mother had to be empress. Only an empress had sufficient status to protect the crown prince and keep the inner palace in check. Yet this empress had to be as unthreatening as possible. It would be best if she had no sons, no powerful father or brothers, no large family base, and no risk of being excessively favored by the emperor. Empress Wang of Qiongcheng fit this description almost perfectly. Even before she entered the palace, her family had been friends with Emperor Xuan and his commoner empress. From the moment she was made empress, her fate was sealed. She had not come to compete for favor, nor to expand her family. Her role was to sit quietly in the empress's position, raise the crown prince, guard the inner palace, and watch over this most fragile and most dangerous succession line for Emperor Xuan. And indeed, she lived out that role for the rest of her life. After Emperor Xuan's death, the crown prince ascended the throne and she became Empress Dowager. Later, when a new emperor ascended, she became Grand Empress Dowager. She spent long years in the palace, living to over 70, witnessing the succession of emperors and the transfer of power from one family to another. But throughout that long life, she left almost no record of interfering in state affairs. Her father was enfeoffed as a marquis, and her family received the honors due to an empress's family. Yet this Wang family did not become a second Huo clan. Her father and brothers did not become Grand Marshal, did not control the imperial secretariat, did not command the imperial guard, and did not stand above all officials to manage the realm's affairs for the emperor. This was a rare restraint in Han times. Perhaps this was the result Emperor Xuan had wanted. He had personally created a consort relative, yet confined that consort relative as much as possible within safe bounds. He gave this woman the title of empress, but denied her the conditions to create a powerful ministerial family. He used her to protect the crown prince, and also to prevent the consort kin system from spiraling out of control again. But once a system is created, it does not always obey the will of its creator. Empress Wang of Qiongcheng could be quiet, but the next Empress Wang might not be able to. The crown prince raised by Empress Wang of Qiongcheng had a gentle, indecisive character. He liked Confucian scholars and music, but he did not possess his father's cold, hard, controlling ability to keep consort kin in check. And when he was still crown prince, a seemingly casual choice had already pushed another Wang family onto the stage of history. At that time, the crown prince's most beloved woman died. Before dying, she said she might have been cursed to death by other concubines. For the crown prince, these words were like a thorn. His own biological mother had died through a conspiracy in the inner palace. So he began to distance himself from the women of the inner palace and no longer wanted to approach them. This was a problem for the empire. The crown prince had to have a son. The throne had to have an heir. So, under Emperor Xuan's instruction, Empress Wang of Qiongcheng selected 5 respectable young women from her own palace and presented them to the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince could not refuse. This was his father's will and his foster mother's arrangement. But his heart was unwilling. So he gave only a perfunctory glance and pointed at random to the woman closest to him. Just her. That woman, chosen at random, was Wang Zhengjun. The Yuan Cheng Wang family behind her, though it could trace back to royal blood from the state of Qi, had long since declined to commoner status, with no foundation whatsoever. But it was precisely because this woman was randomly pointed at by the Crown Prince and brought into his palace that the entire political trajectory of the late Western Han was altered. Soon, Wang Zhengjun gave birth to a boy. At that time, the most important child in the Han Empire. The Emperor, Emperor Xuan, was overjoyed. This child meant the succession line was secure, the Crown Prince's position was more stable, and Wang Zhengjun had suddenly been transformed from an ordinary palace woman into the Crown Princess. In the years that followed, she became Empress, then Empress Dowager, then Grand Empress Dowager. Her father, brothers, sons and nephews would enter the court one by one. Her family would occupy the position of Grand Marshal, control the Imperial Secretariat, command the Imperial Guard, and ultimately push the entire Western Han towards its final twilight. After Emperor Xuan's death, the Crown Prince ascended the throne as Emperor Yuan. Wang Zhengjun, the palace woman who had been randomly pointed at all those years ago, finally became Empress. But Empress did not mean favored. Emperor Yuan's heart was never with her. This new emperor had a mild disposition, liking music, literature, and those who could make him feel at ease and joyful. Wang Zhengjun had given him the most important thing, a son, an heir to the empire. But in the emperor's bedchamber, in those moments belonging to personal intimacy, she was not the most important woman. The most important was Zhao Yi of Fu. Zhao Yi was intelligent, empathetic, and knew how to accompany this sensitive emperor. When Emperor Yuan was still Crown Prince, he had brought her into his life. After he ascended the throne, the ordinary titles for consort seemed insufficient to express his favor, and so a new title appeared in the palace, Zhao Yi. This rank was second only to Empress. It was no longer a mere inner palace designation. It meant that, outside the Empress, the Emperor had personally opened a higher path for the woman he favored. Wang Zhengjun understood this very well. She did not wail and scream, nor did she try to compete with the favored consort for the Emperor's knights. Her greatest strength was precisely in not competing. She knew that what she could truly rely on was not the Emperor's love, but the title of Empress, the position of the Crown Prince's mother, and the succession order that Emperor Xuan himself had confirmed years ago. But soon, that order began to waver. Zhao Yi of Fu also gave birth to a son. Suddenly, Wang Zhengjun's sole advantage was no longer secure. Her son was still Crown Prince, but he was no longer the Emperor's only son. Worse, this Crown Prince did not please his father. As he grew up, he showed a fondness for wine, women, and indolence. Emperor Yuan looked at him and grew increasingly disappointed. The atmosphere in the palace began to change. If an emperor merely favored a particular woman, that was still a matter of the inner palace. But once he began to favor that woman's son, it became a matter of state. Because it meant that the future occupant of the throne might not be the current crown prince. Zhao Yi of Fu naturally understood this. She did not need to say anything at court. She only needed to stay by the emperor's side, to have her son appear before the emperor again and again, to make the emperor feel that her child was more like him, understood him better, and was more worthy of the inheritance. And the crown prince's position would become increasingly precarious day by day. Wang Zhengjun understood as well. But she could not personally step forward to argue. If the empress appeared too eager, she would seem to be scheming for her own son. If she appeared too harsh, she would only annoy the emperor more. So she could only hold her position, hold to ritual law, and hold to those who were still willing to support the crown prince. The one who truly stepped forward was an old minister at the crown prince's side. When Emperor Yuan became gravely ill, the palace gates were once closed to the empress and crown prince. Beside the emperor were his favored woman and her more favored son. Rumors of changing the crown prince began to drift out from the inner court. No one could confirm them, but everyone knew that the appearance of such rumors signaled that danger had reached its final hour. An old minister burst into the inner court, knelt before the emperor's bed, and remonstrated with tears. He said, "If your majesty truly intends to depose the crown prince, the court ministers will certainly fight to the death. If your majesty insists on doing so, then please have me executed first." These words carried great weight, because it was not merely the weeping of one man. It was the voice of the outer court, the old officials, ritual law, and the established succession order all at once. Emperor Yuan, after all, was not a strong-willed man. He did not overturn the arrangement left by his father from his sickbed. The crown prince was saved. Wang Zhengjun was saved. And the telling fact is that this old minister was actually the last powerful figure of the Shi family, Emperor Xuan's own consort kin. Soon after, Emperor Yuan died, and Wang Zhengjun's son ascended the throne, becoming Emperor Qing. Wang Zhengjun became Empress Dowager. The empress who had been neglected by the emperor suddenly stood in the highest mother's position in the empire. She no longer needed to wait for the emperor's favor or compete with any consort for the lights of the bedchamber. She only needed to sit in the Empress Dowager's palace, and her family would naturally draw close to the center of power. The Wangs began to rise. First marquisates, then entry into the court, then command of troops, then the Grand Marshal. Wang Zhengjun's brothers were pushed to the front of the officials, becoming the de facto administrators of the empire. Starting in 33 BCE, the Wang family produced 5 consecutive Grand Marshals, holding power for a total of 35 years. The emperor still sat in the Weiyang Palace, the chancellor still attended court, the imperial censor still impeached officials, and the 9 ministers still handled affairs. But everyone knew that the person who truly decided major matters was no longer the young emperor. It was the Wang family behind the Empress Dowager. At that time, Emperor Qing showed no interest in resistance. He was young, pleasure-seeking, and averse to state affairs. He preferred to hand the empire over to his maternal uncles and seek a lighter, more exciting life for himself. For him, the Wangs holding power was not necessarily a disaster. It was more like relief. State affairs were managed, memorials were read, officials were appointed, and border commanderies were directed. He only needed to be emperor. But this was precisely the danger. When Emperor Wu created the Grand Marshal, the position served the strong imperial will. When Huo Guang served as regent, it relied on the late emperor's entrustment and the youth of the child emperor. By the time of Emperor Qing, the Grand Marshal and Consort kin had become an inertia. As long as the emperor was unwilling to attend to matters, the Empress Dowager's family would attend to them for him. And if the Empress Dowager's family attended to them long enough, the state would gradually become accustomed to their existence. Thus, the Wangs had 5 marquises in one generation. This was not simply glory, it was a sprawling web of power. The palace gates, the Imperial Secretariat, military authority, marquisates, appointments, more and more fell into the hands of this family. Wang Zhenjun did not necessarily need to issue orders every day. As long as she lived, as long as she sat in the honored position of Empress Dowager, the Wangs had the ritual standing to continue advancing. But Wang Zhenjun could use her title as Empress Dowager to strengthen her maternal family. And others could also use the emperor's favor to change the inner palace. The Wangs could control the court, but they could not necessarily control the emperor's desires. Emperor Qing could hand over state affairs to his uncles, but he would not hand over his own bed to their arrangements. Wang Zhenjun would soon discover that while the outer court could be given to the Wangs, the inner palace might not always obey the Empress Dowager. The Wangs could control the court, but they could not control where the emperor went. Emperor Qing was weary of state affairs and weary of the routine empresses, consorts, ritual and rules within the palace walls. He liked to slip out of the palace in civilian clothes, guided by young friends his own age. He liked the sounds, the lights, the women that did not belong to the Weiyang Palace. It was on one such excursion that he met Zhao Feiyan, the flying swallow. It was at a princess's mansion. The feast was laid out, candles flickered, and music rose from below the hall. A low-born dancer and singer performed before the assembly. Her body seemed as light as if it had no weight. As her sleeves spun, she looked as though she might lift off the ground. The emperor took a fancy to her. From that moment, the inner palace order that Wang Zhenjun had labored to maintain began to crack. Zhao Feiyan was brought into the palace and quickly gained favor. She then introduced her younger sister to the emperor. This sister was more direct and more dangerous than she. Zhao Feiyan was like a swallow that would circle beneath a lamp, light, beautiful, and knowing how to please. Her sister was like a hotter fire that could burn away whatever restraint the emperor had left. Soon the emperor was ensnared. Before the two sisters entered the inner palace, Wang Zhenjun's greatest worry had been her son's neglect of governance. Now she faced another problem. Not only did the emperor ignore court affairs, but the inner palace itself was spiraling out of control. The reigning empress was still there. Other women who had once been favored were also there. They had titles, seniority, and their own family connections. For the Zhao sisters to move upward, they had to push these people aside. The opportunity soon arrived. A witchcraft case emerged in the inner palace. Someone was said to be cursing pregnant consorts, and the case also implicated the outer court. After the plot was exposed, a bloody purge began. The Zhao sisters seized this opportunity, dragging the empress and other former favorites into the vortex with endless accusations, eventually persuading the emperor to strike decisively. For a time, everyone in the palace was terrified. Some were deposed, others retreated. Some were forced to leave the emperor's side, while others hid in the Empress Dowager's palace for safety. The Zhao sisters had not entered power through the front door, but they carved a path through a palace disaster. Zhao Feiyan finally attained the position of empress. To make her qualified to be empress, the emperor even first enfeoffed her low-born father as a marquis, as if by bestowing an aristocratic cloak, everyone could forget where she had originally come from. But the real problem was not whether she could be empress. The real problem was that even after she became empress, the emperor still had no sons. A children's rhyme began to circulate in the capital. Swallow flies here, pecks at imperial grandsons. Imperial grandsons die, swallow pecks at dirt. These few lines were short, but they cut like a knife into the Empress Dowager's heart. Everyone knew who the swallow referred to. Everyone knew that the emperor had doted exclusively on the Zhao sisters for years, yet no imperial prince had survived. Everyone knew that at the very time the empire most needed an heir, unspeakable things were happening in the inner palace. Some even claimed with certainty that the emperor, to please the Zhao sisters, had personally ordered the killing of all children born to other women in the palace. But no one could bring these words to Wang Zhenjun. Or rather, some wanted to, but could not get them through. The emperor protected the Zhao sisters. Others in the palace helped them suppress the news. The rumors of pregnant consorts, newborn princes, and secret disposals lingered outside the Changxin palace, but never became an open court case. Thus, an emperor without a son continued to wallow in a love that bore no fruit. An Empress Dowager in power might not know what was happening in the deepest recesses of the inner palace. A consort kin family that actually managed the state could handle memorials, offices, military and civil affairs, but could not produce an heir for the emperor. The empire's most fundamental issue of blood succession was locked away in curtains, fragrances, weeping, and rumors. The court had completely lost control. The final explosion came very suddenly. In 7 BCE, Emperor Qing died in the palace of the younger Zhao sister. From a modern medical perspective, most likely a cerebral hemorrhage caused by excessive excitement. The manner of death was too ugly and too fatal. The emperor left no son. The woman who had been doted upon to the extreme instantly became the target of all eyes. Wang Zhenjun was enraged and demanded an investigation. The younger Zhao sister knew she had no way out and soon committed suicide. But the emperor was dead beyond recall. The inner palace's tangled accounts could be investigated slowly. The blood shadows in the nursery rhyme could be examined slowly. And what exactly the Zhao sisters had done could be revealed layer by layer in later memorials. But at this moment, the most urgent question was only one: who would inherit the throne? Wang Zhenjun naturally hoped that the situation would remain in the Wang's hands. But Emperor Qing had no son. The throne would have to be found from a collateral branch of the Imperial clan. And that collateral heir was already available. Well before Emperor Qing's sudden death, because he had long been without issue, under pressure from all the court officials, the Wangs had been forced to arrange for an adopted son from a collateral branch to serve as a provisional crown prince, just in case. And so the woman who had once been driven from Chang'an and lost the battle over the inner palace succession saw her chance again. Zhao Yi of Fu began to maneuver. She had not been able to replace the crown prince with her own son, but now her grandson had become one of the most suitable candidates for provisional crown prince. This young man had imperial blood, possessed the qualifications for the succession, and more importantly, behind him stood a grandmother who had endured for years and would never forget old grievances. In the end, Zhao Yi of Fu spent vast sums of wealth to persuade Zhao Feiyan, then at the height of her power, to join her in placing her grandson on the throne. Thus, amid the chaos of Emperor Cheng's sudden death, the younger Zhao sister's suicide, and the break in the imperial line, the new emperor was pushed onto the stage, the grandson of Zhao Yi of Fu. He was Emperor Ai. When Emperor Ai ascended the throne, a nearly absurd situation emerged in Chang'an. A young emperor in his early 20s had, hovering over his head, 4 Empress Dowagers. The first was Wang Zhengjun. She was the mother of Emperor Cheng and the legal grandmother of Emperor Ai. Although Emperor Ai was not her biological grandson, since he inherited the imperial line from Emperor Cheng's branch, Wang Zhengjun was the woman of the highest seniority in the empire's ritual order. The second was Empress Dowager Fu. She was the biological grandmother of Emperor Ai. Years ago, in the inner palace of Emperor Yuan, she had lost to Wang Zhengjun and left Chang'an with her son. Decades later, her grandson suddenly became emperor. The woman who had been driven from the center of power had returned. The third was Empress Dowager Ding. She was the birth mother of Emperor Ai. With her son enthroned, she could not continue to stay on the sidelines like an ordinary king's consort. She too demanded an honorific title, a palace, and that her family receive its due reward. The fourth was Zhao Feiyan. She was the empress of Emperor Cheng. Since Emperor Ai nominally inherited the imperial line from Emperor Cheng, even with the dark shadow of swallow-pexed imperial grandsons still hanging over the Zhao sisters, she became by ritual law Empress Dowager as well. 4 women, 4 palaces, 4 sets of titles, 4 families, all crowding over the same empire. This was no longer an inner palace. It was a monster of power, torn apart by ritual law, blood ties, adoption, old grievances, and immediate interests. Behind each Empress Dowager, therefore, was not just a solitary woman. Behind Wang Zhengjun was the Yuan Cheng Wang clan. Behind Empress Dowager Fu were years of pent-up old hatreds. Behind Empress Dowager Ding was the newly enthroned emperor's own maternal family. Behind Zhao Feiyan was the mess left by Emperor Cheng's inner palace. 4 Empress Dowagers coexisting in one reign. On the surface, it was merely a confusion of titles. In reality, it meant the empire could no longer answer the most basic question: who was qualified to speak for the emperor? Wang Zhengjun certainly thought it was she. She had sat in the empress's position for decades, had lived through several emperors, and the Wang clan had long grown accustomed to managing state affairs on behalf of the empire. After Emperor Cheng's death, she demanded an investigation into the old case of the Zhao sisters and the severance of the imperial line. This was not merely the rage of an Empress Dowager. It was the beginning of the Wang clan's attempt to retake control of the situation. Zhao Feiyan soon felt the danger. She knew that if the old case of swallow-pexed imperial grandsons was fully reopened, Her dead sister could take the blame, but she herself and the Zhao family might not escape unscathed. So she chose to ally with Empress Dowager Fu. Empress Dowager Fu was naturally willing to embrace her, because Fu's target was not just an old empress, it was Wang Zhengjun and the Wangs behind her. Wang Zhengjun's investigation of the Zhao case, on the surface, was an inquiry into the deaths of imperial princes. But in reality, it was also a reminder to everyone that the ultimate judicial authority in the empire still lay with the Changxin Palace and the Wang clan. Empress Dowager Fu could not accept this. She had waited too long. Emperor Yuan had favored her back then, yet she had not become the victor. Her son had not become emperor, and she had been driven from Chang'an. Now her grandson had ascended the throne, and she had finally returned to the palace. How could she continue to let that old rival, Wang Zhengjun, stand above her? So the inner palace turned hostile, and the conflict directly affected the court. First, the Zhao sisters were let off lightly, at least not immediately uprooted. Then the spearhead turned toward the Wangs. Those who had investigated the old Zhao case were instead accused of disrespecting the late emperor and opposing the new one. The Wangs began to retreat step by step. The Grand Marshal, who had once dominated the court, was forced to resign and leave Chang'an. One after another, the Wang family members who had stood so high in Emperor Cheng's reign were pushed out of the center of power. The ministers watched all this, and in their hearts they understood. This was not justice triumphing over evil, nor a new emperor restoring imperial power. This was merely a change of consort kin families. The Fus came up. The Dings came up. They received marquisates, entered the court, and took prominent positions. The families behind Empress Dowager Fu and Empress Dowager Ding began to weave a new web around the emperor, just as the Wangs had done before. The Ding family in particular even saw one of its members occupy the position of Grand Marshal for a time. But this did not truly free Emperor Ai from consort kin politics. He had merely pried the Wang's hand off the court and placed the hands of the Fus and Dings there instead. The Fus received marquisates, the Dings received marquisates. Fu clan youths entered the court, Ding clan youths also entered the court. The young emperor had originally wanted to use his biological grandmother's and biological mother's families to suppress the Wang consort kin. But he soon discovered that what he had driven away was not consort kin politics itself. He had only driven away the Wang's consort kin politics and replaced them with the Fu's and Ding's consort kin politics. And the new consort kin were more impatient than the old. The Wangs, after all, had operated for many years. They knew when to advance and when to retreat, and how to hide ambition behind ritual law and precedent. Empress Dowager Fu was different. She returned with old grievances, her methods harsher and her patience thinner. She began to take revenge on old enemies. The woman who had shared favor with her in Emperor Yuan's inner palace was caught up in witchcraft accusations and finally committed suicide. Because Wang Zhengjun was too high in status and too deeply rooted to be easily attacked, Empress Dowager Fu humiliated her to her face. Going further, she personally arranged for Emperor Ai's empress, sending a woman from her own family to the emperor's side. If you were Emperor Ai, what would you do? At this point, Emperor Ai was not a pleasure-seeking, decadent ruler. On the contrary, when he first ascended the throne, he was young, clear-headed, and ambitious. he saw the sickness of the Western Han. The Wang consort kin had dominated the court for too long. Powerful families were increasingly encroaching on the common people. Peasants were going bankrupt. The number of servants was rising, and the foundations of the state were being hollowed out bit by bit. He had thought about change. He wanted to take back power. He wanted to limit consort kin. He also wanted to rectify a society torn apart by great families and magnates. But he had no real power of his own in his hands as emperor. The outer court ministers could submit memorials and debate, but they dared not confront the entire vested interest group on his behalf. The imperial clan was dispersed. Military power had fallen into other hands, and the imperial secretariat and palace gates had long been accustomed to operating around consort kin. So he could only seize the easiest rope, his own consort kin. This was the tragedy of Emperor Ai. The emperor wanted to use consort kin, and the consort kin were also using the emperor. More terrifyingly, when Emperor Ai attempted to touch on the issues of land and servants, he was no longer facing just a single Wang family. He was facing the entire ruling class. The old consort kin opposed him, and the new consort kin did not necessarily support him. Those he had promoted quickly discovered that if the reforms were truly carried out, the knife would fall on them as well. So the young emperor was stuck. He wanted to rectify the state, but found the state apparatus itself was overgrown with the roots of consort kin and powerful families. He wanted to be an effective sovereign, but he was tightly bound by 4 Empress Dowagers, several great families, countless old accounts, and networks of interest. It was at this time that the young man appeared by his side. He had none of the arrogance of the old consort kin, none of the lectures of court officials, none of the controlling nature of grandmothers, mothers, or empress dowagers, none of the tangled ledgers of those families. He was just quiet, beautiful, gentle, always standing by the emperor. To Emperor Ai, this was perhaps the only relationship in the entire Weiyang Palace that required no negotiation. In a world where everyone came with their family, Dong Xian seemed to belong only to him. In the Han Dynasty, it was not an oddity for an emperor to have a male favorite, beginning with Emperor Ai. The founder had one, Emperor Wen had one, Emperor Wu had one, Emperor Qing had one. The real problem was never that the emperor loved a man. It was how far that man could go. Dong Xian went too far. Emperor Ai liked him, not only for his appearance, but perhaps even more for his unthreatening quietness. When he stood by the emperor, he seemed to belong to the emperor alone. That was immensely important to a young and frustrated emperor. Thus, Dong Xian received more and more rewards. First, free access to the palace, then favor for his family members, then mansions, chariots, horses, gold, silver, and treasures. The emperor gave him the finest things, one after another, as if only thus could he prove that there was at least one person in the world who belonged entirely to him. But soon, rewards were not enough. Dong Xian was enfeoffed as a marquis. His wife could enter and leave the palace, even reside within the palace precincts. His younger sister entered the inner palace and received a very high title. The emperor built a mansion for him beside the palace, its scale almost matching that of the palace itself. He also prepared a tomb for him, so that his final resting place would be near the emperor's mausoleum. This was no longer ordinary favor. This was the inch-by-inch pushing of a personal relationship into the center of the imperial system. Court officials became uneasy. They were not afraid that the emperor liked a young man. The emperor could have favored persons, intimate attendants, a private life. The court could tolerate that. But they could not tolerate that this young man was crossing the boundaries of reward, marquisate, and palace favor, approaching true state power. They began to debate, to submit memorials. In the end, Emperor Ai, viewing these as challenges, made the most glaring move. He gave the position of Grand Marshal to Dong Xian. To make way for Dong Xian, he even took the title away from an elder of his own maternal family. This move stunned everyone. The Grand Marshal was not gold, silver, a mansion, or a lover's whisper by the emperor's bed. It was the highest military and civil title in the empire. The Weis had held it, the Huos had held it, the Wangs had held it. Now, a male favorite without military merit, without seniority, without political foundation, had also been placed in it. This was not an appointment. It was a provocation. Emperor Ai seemed to say to the entire court, "You all claim to have merit, virtue, status, family, qualifications, but I insist on giving the highest position to a man who exists only because of me." Voices of opposition immediately arose. Some remonstrated, the emperor ignored them. Some criticized excessive favor. The emperor became angry. The ministers who should have checked the emperor found that they were facing not an ordinary case of misguided appointment, but an emperor who had inextricably bound personal affection and state power together. At this time, an even more terrifying scene was rumored at court. At a banquet, Emperor Ai looked at Dong Xian and said he wished to emulate the sage kings of antiquity and yield the empire to him. Perhaps it was just a drunken joke, but the Son of Heaven could not make such jokes. Especially in an age when there was no imperial prince, the succession was unstable, consort kin were fighting each other, and the court had already been torn apart by the inner palace. A casual utterance by the emperor could become a signal that shook the realm. A minister immediately remonstrated, saying that the empire was the empire of the ancestors, not the emperor's personal property to give away. Emperor Ai did not actually abdicate, but everyone remembered those words. From then on, Dong Xian was no longer just a favored young man. He became a symbol feared by the entire ruling establishment. The consort kin hated him because he had bypassed family and lineage to seize a position they believed only they deserved. The Confucian officials hated him because his rise proved that morality, seniority, classical learning and merit could not compete with the emperor's bedside intimacies. Even those who normally fought among themselves reached a silent consensus in their fear of Dong Xian. This man had to be ended. But as long as Emperor Ai lived, no one could truly touch him. So everyone waited. In 1 BC, the waiting ended. Emperor Ai died suddenly at the age of 25. Wang Zhengjun entered the Weiyang Palace, took the imperial seal, and recalled Wang Mang. The Wang consort kin, once driven from the center of power by Emperor Ai, returned to the court at a single order of the Grand Empress Dowager. The transfer of power was astonishingly swift. Then Dong Xian was impeached. Knowing all was lost, he quickly committed suicide. The Dong family was ransacked, its members exiled. The young man who had stood at the pinnacle of the empire just a day before vanished like an overly dazzling dream. But the Wang's reckoning did not stop with Dong Xian. Zhao Feiyan was also pursued. The woman who had once sat in the Empress's position, implicated in the rumors of the severed imperial line, now had no place to hide after the Wangs regained power. She committed suicide. Emperor Ai's Empress was also pursued. She came from the Fu family. The woman Empress Dowager Fu had personally arranged for her grandson to marry. With Emperor Ai's death, the Fus lost their emperor, lost their protector, and lost their reason to remain at the center of power. She too was forced toward death. An even colder reckoning fell on the dead themselves. Empress Dowager Fu and Empress Dowager Ding had already died. But Wang Mang argued that they had disrupted government and brought calamity to the state, and were unworthy of continued burial in the imperial mausoleums. Even Wang Zhengjun thought at first that since they were already dead, why go that far? But Wang Mang insisted. In the end, their graves were opened, their coffins moved, their tomb mounds leveled, and thorny brambles planted over them. The Empress Dowagers, who had once commanded the inner palace, competed for honorific titles, and driven out the Wangs, did not escape the victor's vengeance even in death. Such was the final court politics of the Western Han. It killed not only the living, but also the dead. It fought not only over offices, but over burial grounds. It decided not only who sat beside the emperor, but who was worthy to remain in the ancestral mausoleums. The Wangs were back in power. The ministers may have thought that the absurd male favorite Dong Xian had finally been purged, that the chaos of the Fus, Dings, and Zhao sisters was finally over, and that the empire had returned to its familiar track. The Grand Empress Dowager sat in the inner palace. The Wang consort kin controlled the inner court. The outer court ministers cooperated in submitting memorials. A young new emperor awaited enthronement. Everything looked like a situation the Han had seen many times before. But no one realized that this time was not a restoration of order. This was the last time the Western Han entrusted the state to consort kin. And the Wang Mang, whom Wang Zhengjun had recalled, would no longer be content to be merely Grand Marshal.